Hi, I'm Maggie.
And I'm Marin, and you're listening to
Tell Me I'm Sorry,
a podcast where we deconstruct and muse on depictions of girlhood in film, literature, and other media.
A feminist celebration of pop culture, the audacity of youth, and the ways we grow away from and into our bodies, beliefs, and dreams for ourselves and each other.
And today we are discussing
The incredibly true adventure of two girls in love.
It's a mouthful, that title.
For a moment, I was like, wait.
I was about to hand you my notes that have the title at the top because I was like, did she forget?
I was thinking, was the word adventure plural for a moment? I was like, was it the incredibly true adventures of two girls in love? But then I was like, no. Anyway. Right?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
singular. Girls, plural, adventure,
Yes.
singular. It's quite the title. It's a mouthful, but a good mouthful, like a mouthful of spaghetti, which is just,
Okay.
for me personally, a pure joy. If my mouth is going to be full of something, I'd want it to be full of pasta.
That's fair.
Or the title of this movie, which was written and directed by Maria Meggenti. This was her first film. She also directed and wrote a movie called Puccini for Beginners, which I have never seen. She also co-wrote the films Monte Carlo, which I have never seen, but I remember being advertised to me when I was a middle schooler because I was the exact age bracket for that movie. It's like a PG ride with Selena Gomez when she was fresh off Disney Channel. And then Maria Meggenti also co-wrote the adaptation of Before I Fall, which is an adaptation of a YA novel that I have actually read. And when I read it, I was a teenager, but I liked it. Didn't see the movie, though. Do you have... You're just nodding along. Okay.
I never have any information really about the background of.
Well, sometimes I say things, though, and you know what they are.
I knew nothing. Blank slate.
Fun fact also, Before I Fall, I read it in a car during a very long car ride when my family took a road trip somewhere. And I read the whole book in like one sitting, and my mom ran out of stuff to read. So then she read it during that car ride. And I think she liked it also. She thought it was sad, which it was. But
I like that anecdote.
thank you. This film, The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love, was released June 16th, 1995. And then poster tagline this week. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
There's a first time for everything.
That's true. It really isn't what I was expecting.
I wasn't expecting it to be like that either.
I don't know. I like it.
But, you know, indeed, there is a first time for beautiful girl gives you book of poetry and then you frolic around in a field and fall in love. Like what happens in this movie, there is a first time for that.
That's true.
I'd give it a B, that tagline. Because it's not inaccurate, but it feels a little uninspired.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Maybe we'll start grading all of them now.
I like the grading.
This can be a segment. We're always trying to come up with new segments. Everybody. Okay, now, Maggie, you get to do the thing that you do so well, which is read the logline for this movie for our dear listeners.
An adventurous love story between two young women of different social and economic backgrounds who find themselves going through all the typical struggles of a new romance. Okay. It's also really straightforward.
Yeah.
There's so much poetry in this film.
I know.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Two young women of different social and economic backgrounds. That is true, and probably we'll talk more about this, but for me, that definitely felt secondary to just the experiences that they were having together. It felt like it was in the background to me.
In like a negative way?
No. I mean, I wouldn't have thought to put it in the log line.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought to front load that information when I'm describing the movie.
Yeah.
That would come later.
Because I think the way the movie introduces the characters lays out pretty clearly their socioeconomic standing. It's very clear from when we meet Randy. We see her at her job and then we see her go home, and it's very obvious that this is a small house. There's a lot of people living there. Versus Evie's house, it's about a romance that has a class divide, but the class divide isn't necessarily the thrust of the romance. It's not like Dirty Dancing or Titanic, where that's such a huge factor in those relationships. It's still here, and the characters still talk about it, and it's obviously a huge part of who the characters are and how they understand the world. But it's not the main narrative. It's not the main source of conflict in the romance. Anyways, okay. Sorry, I'm already going off. Before I even provide a rundown of what this movie is, I would strongly recommend you watch it. I would, in fact, beg people to watch this movie. Because like I said when I introduced it, I have never met another person in my life who had seen this movie. And I feel like everybody would just be happier if we all watched this movie. This movie is a teen coming-of-age romance. It is centered around two high school seniors. Our entry into the movie is through the character Randy, who is played by Laurel Holloman, who later would go on to star in The L Word. Randy comes from a working class family, and she lives with her Aunt Rebecca and Rebecca's girlfriend Vicky. Randy herself is also a lesbian, and her best friend is a boy named Frank, who is gay. So her life is very full of queer people and queer community, but she still faces a lot of bullying at school due to her sexuality and her tomboyish appearance. She works at a gas station after school, and one day a classmate of hers, who is named Evie, pulls up in her Range Rover and asks for help putting air in her tires. And we learn that Evie's parents are divorced. She mostly stays with her mom, but both her parents are very well off financially. And from this initial interaction at the gas station, a very sweet friendship forms at first between Randy and Evie. They bond in detention after getting caught smoking in the bathroom. Evie gives Randy a copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass after Randy mentions that she loves to spend time outside. And eventually they start to fall in love. They hold hands in a diner. Randy invites Evie over for family dinner. Evie tells her friends that she is with Randy romantically, and her friends react very cruelly to this, but Evie is very resolute in her relationship with Randy. And then everything comes to a head on Evie's 18th birthday. Her mom is out of town on a business trip, so Evie invites Randy to spend the weekend together. They cook a huge meal, they have sex for the first time, and it is all very romantic and sweet. But then Evie's mom comes home early and finds the girls asleep together in bed and is upset. At this point, Evie has not told her mom about her relationship with Randy. And both girls, they run out of the house, they drive away to a motel. And while all this is happening, Randy's Aunt Rebecca, who thinks Randy is at her friend Frank's house, she finds a letter in Randy's room stating that Randy does not have enough credits to graduate high school. So now Rebecca is also mad and looking for Randy. And eventually, Evie's mom and Randy's family unite in their search for the girls, find them at a motel. By lots of clever maneuvering, literally every single character in the movie ends up in the parking lot of this motel. Everyone is yelling. Randy and Evie don't know what to do, but they eventually open the door to their room and they embrace while everyone argues in the background. And it is very operatic and charming and whimsical. The end. Anything you want to add? I did leave out some pivotal key plot points for time, which we can maybe get into them later. But like, what's her face? The opening shot of this movie is Randy making out with an adult woman.
Yeah, I mean, I figure we will get into that because it's wild.
It's wild, and that's the one thing where I'm like, oh, this didn't age well. I mean, it wasn't good then, but
no,
particularly now. And that type of age gap situation is something we've talked about before on this podcast too. So I figured it would come up.
Because the character, Wendy, right?
Wendy, yeah.
Because it's, I don't know, it's so ridiculous. Her character is very, there's just like a frivolity to her entire existence.
Yeah.
The way that she is presented, like she just sort of like flits in and out of the gas station where Randy works or the automobile. It's a gas station.
Yeah. We'll get into it.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, though, you had never heard of this movie before I announced that we were going to talk about it. You had never seen it. So I'm very excited to hear what that experience was like for you. What is your origin story for The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love?
Well, I was surprised that I hadn't seen it before. Apparently, everyone has. I asked 3 people, right? And all 3 people were like, yes. And I was
really?
like, yeah. But also, I'm like older, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like on Netflix right now.
I forgot about that when I mentioned it, but it did get added to there not that long ago.
Yeah. It made me think about like how the 90s are just like coming back. And not that they ever left, obviously, but like Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the young Gen Z and Gen Alpha are like really embodying the aesthetics, but also like the spirit of the 90s, like this sort of like grittiness. I think that's why photo dumps on Instagram are a thing now, because like it's cool to just take pictures that aren't posed and that maybe like that you would maybe take with a disposable camera and just take a bunch and then just dump them all, like the photo dumps we would do on Facebook. This movie just got me thinking about all of those things. Oh, but I never got back to my first thought, which was like, that's Tina from the L Word.
Yeah.
I was like, it's fucking Tina, which was part of the reason why I couldn't believe I'd never seen this, because big fan of the L Word. Obviously, watching it now, there are a lot of problems in the way certain characters are portrayed, but it was an important show at the time, and I'm glad that it existed. So, yeah, anyway, I was just like, that's Tina. So that's all I kept thinking the whole time I was watching it.
Baby Tina.
Yeah, she looks so young.
They do. They really do look like high schoolers. And they just look so natural. They're both such natural performers. Evie. Did I mention Evie is played by Nicole Parker? I think I forgot to mention that. They just naturally embody high schoolers so well, even though I'm not sure how old they were when they filmed this movie either.
But they had to have been quite young.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, they had to have been around the age that they were playing. I think that's where a lot of the whimsy comes from, is because they really do like embody what it's like to be teenagers. And that was maybe my favorite part about the like viewing experience, is the fact that even when they get themselves into, they're engaging in like more mature activities like drinking, or like then they have this for their first sexual experience with each other. I don't mean first in general. And then they just like go back to being teenagers.
Right. I'm on the fucking road, man.
Yeah.
Randy's yelling at her aunt on the phone, and she doesn't have an actual excuse for what she's doing. She's just like, I'm on the road.
And like when the mom comes in and is just, they're screaming and they're like, when they were in the hotel room, what did they get so excited about? I love that part of it.
Oh, when Wendy's husband shows up And Evie lies about who she is to get him to leave.
Mm-hmm.
That's the simple way of putting it. And then he leaves and Randy comes out and he's like, oh my God, you did it. And they're jumping up and down. And 2 seconds before that, they had been fighting. And then this happens and Evie successfully gets him to leave. And then they're jumping up and down and then they start making out.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone shows up in the parking lot screaming.
Yeah. That's exactly the kind of energy that I would that I need in a movie and that I loved about this one. Because that is what being an adolescent is like.
Yeah.
It's just this constant moving in and out of adulthood and teenagerness.
This movie is really goofy in a lot of ways. And I really love that about it.
And that goofiness is what makes me forget sometimes that Wendy is 27 years old sleeping with a 17-year-old.
I know. Well, they never slept together. Still making out with this.
I mean, yeah.
Well, because before Randy and Evie have sex for the first time, Randy says, I've never done this before. And Evie's like, wait, really? And she's like, no, I've never done this before. So I took that to mean she and Wendy never had sex. Wendy would just show up and they would make out sometimes.
I took it to mean that it was new because she had never done anything physically intimate to that degree with Evie before. But maybe I was just reading too much into it. But I think that there is a truth to the fact that, like, every time you have sex with someone new, it's a new experience.
Yeah.
Neither of you have ever done that before, but it's a new person and it's different every time.
Well, that's an excellent point. I guess the way I interpreted that scene is because Evie says first, I've never done this before. And I take Evie saying that to mean I've never done this with a woman before. Because at the beginning of the movie, Evie does have a boyfriend who she breaks up with, and we don't know any specifics of their relationship, really. So I don't know whether she had sex with that guy or not. But I think Evie's assumption is that Randy has had sex with women before. And I take Randy's response to mean, no, I haven't had sex with a woman before either. So we're both each other's first. But your read is also accurate in that every time you are intimate with a new person, there is a never before done this-ness happening.
Anyway, your origin story.
my origin story is kind of parallel to my Cruel Intentions origin story in that it all started with YouTube. Which YouTube was just so different when I was a middle schooler in that it was a relatively newer website. And there were people on there who were quote unquote YouTubers, but it was not the business model career maker that it is today. It was mostly just a repository of random home videos people took that they thought were funny and they put on there, or people using it as a dumping ground for clips of other media. So it was really easy to watch whole movies on YouTube, especially because people would upload. They wouldn't upload the movie as one continuous video. They would break it into 5 or 6 separate videos to avoid copyright stuff. And so I just found this movie on YouTube and watched it in multiple parts and was very curious by it because it was definitely one of those first, if not the first, like, film representation of a queer relationship that I had seen. It was definitely the first that ended happily and was infused with joy and not tragedy, because I definitely knew what Brokeback Mountain was, or movies of that ilk, which I'm not saying those are bad movies, but they're just really fucking sad. And this was a depiction of a lesbian relationship that was happy and sweet and sexual and tender. And so it just piqued a lot of interest in me because I was like, oh, it normalized it for me in a lot of ways, because growing up Catholic and going to Catholic school, I wasn't, being taken to pride rallies and taught about gay rights movements. That was not a part of my upbringing. So it was very profound in that way. And I return to this movie a lot. I really enjoy coming of age movies broadly. You've probably gleaned that by now if you listen to this podcast. And when I was younger, I definitely loved them and sought them out because I watched them aspirationally, because I had this idea of like, oh, this gives me something to look forward to. This is giving me a vision for what I want my adolescence to be like. It made the uncertainty seem less daunting because I could look to movies to be a source of reality, even though I knew they weren't reality, but I was hopeful that they could be reality. And I still really enjoy coming of age movies. They're just my perfect little slice of comfort film, I would say. And now I think more than anything, when I return to them, it's because I find them very cynicism shattering. And because the most ideal coming of age movie is about capturing these very specific moments of discovery, right? And I think often when I'm feeling most hopeless about the world, it's that I get caught up on this idea that there's nothing good left to discover because everything is bad. Mm-hmm. And so returning to a film like this one that crystallizes so well these specific moments of joyful discovery, it's very invigorating for me, even though I am now far older than the characters that are being depicted in this movie. The other thing I want to say, which is my origin story, I guess, for this specific outing of watching this movie. When I approached Maggie with the idea for this podcast, I always knew that we would cover this movie. I love it so much. It's so special to me. But I won't speak for you. But speaking for me, selecting the movie for this podcast is a very inexplicable process, very intuitive, and I just sort of go on my gut. And I'm always like, I have to wait for the right time to pick the right movie. And so basically the right time for picking this movie, I think, ended up being a breaking point of sorts, in that leading up to this movie, I realized that so often in talking about girlhood for this podcast, what we actually ended up talking about were terrible men and boys who were inserting themselves into other girlhoods. Mm. It's not bad that we were talking about those things. I don't think we were giving space to anything that shouldn't have been given space. We're like talking about misogyny, but it was wearing on me emotionally, I think. And so I was like, I'm going to pick this movie that does have men in it. It has like 2 men in it. 3 if you count Walt Whitman. But so 2 of those men are delightful gay men, and then one of the men in this movie, who's Wendy's husband, is genuinely awful, but he's hardly in it. So I was just like, I want to watch something where we get to talk about girlhood without mostly the interference of patriarchal bullshit. Obviously, Randy and Evie still deal with homophobia, and there is Wendy's terrible husband. So the world in this movie is not imagining itself to be totally free of that. But I was hoping that this movie would move us in that direction, at least for today.
All of those things that you were saying, I feel them too, for sure. So it was really wonderful to be able to just watch this. And I don't want to repeat you, but truly, I'm just like, wow, we just get to watch them be girls. They're just being teenagers and they're just doing dumb shit. Yes, Evie's mom is homophobic. in the way that she responds to the finding Randy in bed with her daughter. I think one of the ways in which the movie does a good job at allowing them to just be girls is that scene, though, no matter what, the parent would have been really fucking pissed. You had sex in my bed?
Yeah, and left a huge mess in the kitchen.
You got drunk, just destroyed the house, and then had sex in my bed? Oh my God, I would be so mad as a parent. I would be so mad. I don't care. I don't care who you're sleeping with.
And I do think some of the comedy of that scene is that I get the sense Evie's mom is more pissed about the state of the house than Evie having had sex with another girl. At the end, when she shows up at a hotel and she tells Evie that she's going to get her therapy and the implication is we're going to fix you, that is deeply troubling. But when the mom is like going through the kitchen and sniffing the wine glass and she's so mad about it, it is funny. And in that moment, I'm kind of on her side because that kitchen looks like an absolute nightmare.
No, I would have been so fucking mad. They're making these normal teenager mistakes, but there is this undertone of the world is that much more dangerous for them because they are queer, right? And in love. But the movie isn't overshadowed by that. And it made me think of National Anthem.
Great film. We saw it together.
Absolutely amazing. Beautifully shot. So good. So good. And if you're not familiar, National Anthem is very, very briefly a film about this chosen family of queer people in the rodeo circuit, like out west. And it's about their lives and their interpersonal relationships. And Marin and I attended an after film talk. And a lot of the criticism that we heard that I think both of us did not agree with is that it almost allowed for this sort of like utopian vision of queer love. And I just so vehemently disagree.
Yes,
with
100%.
That for a lot of reasons. And the main one being we get to enjoy movies and media in general about queer people just being in love and living their fucking lives without it being about how the rest of the world is homophobic. Because that's already there. We already know that is existing. We already know that that is a challenge for them in their lives, beyond just a challenge, right? The horrible things in the world already defined so much of how queer people are allowed to experience joy. I was about to say we don't need another movie about it. I don't think that's true. But I definitely don't think it's true that we don't need movies that are just celebrating queer people as people experiencing life.
Yes, exactly. I'm really glad that you brought up National Anthem because I think the scene in National Anthem in the Walmart is a really good analog to the scene in the diner between Evie and Randy when they hold hands for the first time. Because in National Anthem, it's just this group of characters, all of whom are queer in some way. They're just getting a little rowdy in a Walmart. And it's this gorgeous scene where one of the characters puts blue eyeshadow on another character. And it's his first time wearing eyeshadow. And it's this transformative experience for him. And it's just amazing. And in this after film talk that we went to, which was hosted by the theater that showed the film, it was just a moderated discussion between people who had seen the movie. And essentially, people were complaining that they didn't get hate crimed in Walmart. To like boil it down to it. Because that wasn't realistic. Because they're in this rural Western area being openly queer and no one is bothering them for it at this Walmart. And I found that to be wildly off-putting. That take just, I don't even have the word. I don't even know what I think that take is besides wrong. It's wrong. It's just wrong for the reasons that you astutely put. Any person watching this movie who has any understanding of how the world is already knows that when these people are in public, there's a threat of homophobia or transphobia. So we don't need to make that explicit in this movie. We can just have it be, oh, they're having fun in Walmart. Look, it wasn't that nice. And in the scene in the diner where Randy and Evie hold hands, they're sitting across from each other at the table. And Randy, who is like an out lesbian and has a crush on Evie, but has not confessed this to Evie, really. But there's obvious attraction between them and there's tension. And Evie has given Randy the poetry book, which is just very romantic in an exact way an 18-year-old would be. And Evie says to Randy, I really want to hold your hand right now. And Evie says, I've held hands with a girl before. And then Randy goes, but have you held hands with a girl like me before? The implication being everyone in this town knows I'm a lesbian. So if you hold hands with me, you're holding hands with a lesbian, which makes you lesbian by association. And Evie's like, I still want to hold your hand if you want to. And it becomes this really sweet scene where she tells Randy, like, I want you to unshelter me. Because Randy tells Evie that she's sheltered. Because Evie hasn't dealt with homophobia before the way Randy has. And so the scene is talking about the threat of violence. But then they hold hands and the waitress comes to refill their coffee. And the way the scene is framed, you can tell they're both anxious about the waitress seeing them holding hands. And she doesn't say anything. She doesn't give a shit. And so they just get to sit there and hold hands. The scene is building tension with the possibility of violence, but then it doesn't act on it. It's like, oh, actually, we don't have to have violence all the time. Even if we do have to be aware of its possibility, which is a tragedy in and of itself, it's not always going to follow through. Whereas that Walmart scene in National Anthem, there's nothing that happens in that scene that makes you think it's going to turn violent. It's just being a person and knowing, like, oh, this could turn violent. But the movie even, it feels like it's progressed a step even in the decades since, where they're literally just having fun at Walmart, and that's the whole scene. And so I think it's interesting to think of those movies and those scenes in relationship to each other.
Movies are able to celebrate queer people as people, both in terms of existing in a way that is inseparable from queerness and also in a way that is beyond their queerness. And you don't have to insert violence into depictions of those experiences because the possibility for violence is already there.
Right. What else?
There is just this one scene I want to mention. Maybe we'll just cut this, but I just don't want to forget about it because I love it. And It's when everybody shows up at the hotel, right? Because in the end, like, it is so dramatic. Everybody's there. Wendy and her crazy husband, everyone's there. The aunts, the ex-girlfriend, Evie's mom, just to reiterate.
The three friends who dumped Evie after she came out to them, but then they somehow end up in the parking lot.
Mm-hmm. Like, and Frank, the friend.
Frank, yeah.
So basically every single friend. And they're running around to different hotel rooms trying to find them. And they open this one hotel room and it says two women in nightgowns who are they're at least in like their mid-70s. And they open the door and they're like, have you seen, I don't know. They ask, like, have you seen them? And they're like, did our husband send you here or something like that? So, I mean, the implication is that these women are in a relationship, have been potentially for years, and have been hiding it from their husband. It was funny and sweet. And also, again, calls to mind the dangers of being openly queer, but in a way that still honored and celebrated their love for each other. Because it just shows that these women have been doing this for, I don't know. I guess I assume this is just how their lives have been.
Right. Exactly. I love that you brought up that scene. That moment is magnificent. And it actually makes me think about something that I do want to talk about that I have in my notes, which is just a little spiel about the title of this movie, The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love. And I am really hinging on that phrase, incredibly true, because this movie is a work of fiction in terms of it doesn't come with the tagline, based on a true story, etc. But I love the title of this movie. I think what the title of the movie is getting at is that it's saying, even if you, because of the circumstances of your life, were denied this experience that you have just seen on screen, or maybe this experience happened to you, but it happened in secret and no one ever knew about it. Or maybe this experience was complicated by shame. It was still like true for you. It was still a beginning of sorts for you. And this was true in 1999 or 1995. It is still true now. It will probably, unfortunately, be true for many decades to come, in that there will always be people who say queerness isn't real, or who say that queer love stories are not actually love stories. And I think sometimes the only way we can cope with that is to insist otherwise. And so I think this title is a very, very straightforward insistence that this might be a work of fiction, but it is also incredibly true because it is making visible the experience of so many people that has not been made visible before in the way romantic relationships between men and women have. The movie's conceit to me seems to be that this story that it is presenting gets to be true for whomever needs it to be true. And it also made me think about this tendency to straight wash queer historical figures. How many fucking movies have been made about real people where the poster says based on a true story, and it's like, surprise, this person was actually bisexual. Like, yes, they were married to a man, but she also had this other lover who was a woman for 20 years, and the movie just doesn't fucking talk about it ever. That happens all the time. And so in some movies, the story of those two elderly women who are sneaking off to be together, they wouldn't exist at all. And here, warranted, it's only a little grace note, but they're still here. I'm getting very literature student in my textual reading of this title, but I really, really respect it and think it's important. And that was why I wanted to go on that spiel about it.
No, I like that because I hadn't thought of that. The title itself is very playful, and it fits so perfectly in with the way that the movie plays out. And then in the end, though, I did get the sense that there is like a lot of truth, like actual maybe truth to this film because of the end theme dedication, if you want to talk about that.
Sure. So before the main credits roll at the end of this movie, a dedication pops up on the screen, which says, and this is a direct quote, "This film is dedicated to my very first girlfriend. May our relationship finally rest in peace." Which I love that so much. I love when movies are dedicated to people. Just generally. You see that in books a lot, but I feel like in movies it's less common. So some coming of age movies, they lean a lot more into the idea that the romance depicted is going to last forever. They want to leave the audience with that feeling. When we watch, God forbid I'm going to bring it up, when we watch Cruel Intentions, we're supposed to think that if Sebastian hadn't gotten run over by a taxi, he and Reese Witherspoon would have been together forever. That is that movie's intention, to make you think that. And then some movies lean less into that. And I think this movie, with the dedication, leans more into the not forever category. Despite having a scene where Randy and Evie put their hands on a copy of Leaves of Grass and swear they're going to love each other forever. Which is also a kind of dedication, if you think about it. When they dedicate their love on this book. The point of that scene, I don't read it as telling the audience, see, here's proof that they're going to be together forever and high school sweetheart love for all eternity. But I think the point of that scene is declaring your love on a copy of The Leaves of Grass when you're 18 and in love for the first time just is the right thing to do. Even if this relationship isn't necessarily gonna last forever. That's what being 18 and in love is. What I appreciate about the dedication at the end of this film is dedicated to my very first girlfriend. May our relationship rest in peace. What I appreciate about that, besides its just obvious candor about the messiness of being young and in love, is that I think it's also saying what I was arguing about the title earlier, which is that even if these things do not last forever, or they don't end the way, even if they end in ways we couldn't have imagined when they first began, they were still true. They still happened. They still meant something. And also, even if this relationship ends, maybe there is a part of them that will love each other forever. One of my favorite quotes in all of literature is from E.M. Forster's A Room with a View, which got a fantastic movie adaptation, which I might make you watch for this podcast one day, is when a character tells another character, it is impossible to love and to part. And I love that quote so much because I don't know if I agree with it. And because it can be parsed in so many ways. It is impossible to love and to part. But I think this movie, I'm like, yeah, even if they go off in their separate directions and they don't stay together forever, that love is never going to fully part them. They'll always love each other for just a little bit. And I also just like when a movie makes me feel this way. Sorry, I'm all in my feelings now. Well, you should say something.
I love that this movie celebrates first loves, and honors that for the weight that those experiences hold.
Mm-hmm.
I often find myself thinking about this sort of temporary nature, though, of relationships in adolescence. Because obviously I'm teaching and I know which of my students are like dating each other because they make it obvious, sometimes too obvious. And I'm like, go to class, stop making out in the hallway. This is gross. Do it somewhere else. And sometimes like I feel a little bit sad because I'm like, you guys are going to break up probably. This isn't going to last for you. And it's going to hurt so much when you do. And it's going to be so bad. And like, I felt that way watching this because I also love that our characters are given the presence of mind to consider whether or not they're going to be together when they're 30, which for them feels like so old.
I know.
30. I felt excited for them for this love that they're experiencing and sad that, it probably will end. And that's okay. Watching the youth of today go through that, or when I can just like kind of see what's coming, my heart is breaking for them. But also there's like this sense of nostalgia, which of course is a mix of emotions as it is.
It's like how when I was young and had never even been kissed yet by anyone, there was a part of me that was both anticipating my first romantic encounters and relationship, but was also kind of anticipating my first breakup because I knew that that was also this equally as profound rite of passage. And it was this warring debacle in my brain of, yeah, I want to fall in love and be in love forever and experience that joy. But also some of that was bullshit where I was like, oh, well, if I get dumped, then I'll be really artistically productive because I'll be sad or something, which is not necessarily true. But then, of course, when you do fall in love, there's this part of you that's like, oh, I don't think this is going to be forever. But then even when it does end, it still is the worst thing that has ever happened to you.
No, here's the thing. I have had relationships as an adult that I knew were going to end. And that's what's weird about entering relationships as an adult is because when you're a teenager, because Randy and Evie in the final moments of the movie, they're like, okay, but we'll love each other forever, right? Mm-hmm. And they like really want to believe that. Yeah. And I think that they do in that moment. So even though they recognize maybe they won't be together forever, ultimately they're like, yes, we will. When you're a teenager, that's what it's like. And then when you're an adult, you enter into these relationships that you know aren't going to work. But you just do it. But it's not even like the relationships are necessarily bad.
You just see the writing on the wall in terms of incompatibilities or whatever.
Movies and books like Twilight and The Hunger Games, right? Actually, I thought of Twilight when watching this when they're in the meadow. But then when you were talking about, I was like, yeah, Twilight, like they are together for literally forever.
Yes.
And then in The Hunger Games, we know it's just between Peeta and Gale. It's Peeta or Gale, and she picks Peeta. And given it's in this dystopian society where, you know, she hasn't really had an opportunity to meet that many other people. Mm-hmm. So I get that. But she would have had other options. Potentially. I'm not saying Peeta was a bad choice. I'm not saying...
It's been so long since I read The Hunger Games.
I'm just saying, so often teen romances are depicted as things that either last forever or just really frivolous and don't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, neither of those things are true.
Right.
They're really meaningful, temporary relationships that formulate a lot of who we become.
Right. And I think this movie is operating on a level where if you're 13-year-old me watching it for the first time, you get to the end, you see that dedication that pops up, and you still think, oh, Evie and Randy are going to be in love forever. They're going to be together forever. But then you rewatch it when you're an adult, and you see that dedication at the end, and you're like, maybe this means something different. And I don't know what Meggenti's intention is by putting that dedication there, other than what is literally in the text itself. I dedicate this movie to you, this one person. I like to think the movie is envisioning multiple audiences where it is giving young people this romantic ideal that they can look up to. And then it's also giving them a text that they can continue to grow with as they get older and interpret differently as they get older. Because now I watch a lot of coming of age stuff and I'm like, I see the temporariness of it in ways I never did when I was the age of the characters being depicted. And that's just part of becoming an adult and also revisiting stuff that you loved when you were younger. Mm-hmm. Because you have just sort of named some scenes that you really love. Can I just talk about what my favorite moment is in this movie and we can just gush about it? But this episode is just me gushing. I just want to feel good. My favorite moment in this movie. Really, it's one of my favorite moments in all of cinema, now that I'm thinking about it, is when Evie and Randy are at Evie's house. They've cooked their elaborate meal. They've drunk wine. They've smoked weed. They've had the best evening of their lives. They're sitting on the floor by the dining room table. And they're kind of drunk. They're kind of stoned. They've eaten all this food. And they're just talking and they're laughing. And Evie tells Randy that she is beautiful. And the way she says it, they're just so good in this scene. They're so good in the whole movie. But this scene in particular, the way Evie says it, and then the look that Randy gets on her face as Evie has told her that she is beautiful is so magical. And when Evie tells Randy that she is beautiful, and Randy hears this, and she just has this awestruck expression. And it's not necessarily that she, like, doesn't believe Evie, but that I think Randy has probably spent so much of her life, I don't want to say not thinking that she's beautiful, but at least telling herself she doesn't need other people to think she's beautiful. Because Randy is very tomboyish in her appearance, and she gets bullied a lot because of that, but you get the sense that that is how she feels most comfortable presenting herself, so that's how she's going to present herself. But also she's still bullied because of it, and that really fucking sucks. So I think she's probably told herself, maybe I'm not beautiful, but I don't need other people to think I'm beautiful. I just need to, like, be who I am. But then you have this moment where this girl that she loves tells her that she is beautiful. And you see, it just is all in her face and in her eyes. Oh, maybe I am beautiful. In that moment, Evie becomes the person who tells her the thing she has told herself doesn't matter is true. Maybe Randy has made peace with this idea that maybe she's not beautiful. But because Evie has said it, and Evie has said it with her words, and she said it in her face, then she's like, oh, wait, maybe it's true. And it's like this deep wish has been true all along. But you just needed the love of another person to, like, make you realize that it was true. And it's all just wrapped up in these two girls looking at each other. I can't even describe the physiological response I have every single time I watch that scene. I don't cry. It's like beyond crying. It's just so heartwarming to me and sweet, and also is the exact kind of scene that now as an adult conjures up these very specific memories from my own youth. And I think it just taps into this idea that we can't always rely on ourselves to know ourselves, that sometimes we need other people to help us do that. And that's why having a first love that doesn't necessarily last forever is so important, because often that is like how you unlock that idea within yourself.
And it's really counteracting this idea that I personally find toxic, which is the axiom that you can't love someone else until you love yourself. It's such an individualistic idea of what it really means to love and to be loved. And I think it's untrue. Mm-hmm. And so what we're getting in that moment is Randy being loved in this way that I don't know if she ever really thought of whether or not she deserved that kind of love, because she hadn't experienced it before. So how can you know? Mm-hmm. But what we're getting in that moment is Randy realizing that that kind of love exists.
Yeah.
And that maybe she could love herself in the way that she is loved.
Mm.
I think the exact opposite is true. You can't really love yourself until you love someone else. And because in that moment too, they're seeing reflections of themselves in each other. And they're seeing themselves through each other's eyes. That is a cliche, but it's a cliche because it happens.
Right. Talking about this made me think of this line in the novel Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I am an unashamed Sally Rooney head. I know some people are like, she's overrated. I love her novels. Have you ever read a Sally Rooney novel?
I don't think so.
I love them. And Her fourth one just came out. I haven't read it yet. But Beautiful World, Where Are You? Is, I would say, her most optimistic novel. And there was a scene where these two characters who grew up together, they knew each other as children and now they're adults, and they've reconnected as adults, are at a wedding for someone else. And they see each other from across the room. And in that moment, they make eye contact. The prose goes through this history of their childhood together, and it's so deft and beautiful. And there is this description of the way they look at each other, which I wrote down because I liked it in this little notebook that I have. And this is what it says. It's very brief. It says, "And in the soil of that look, many years were buried." And I feel like that look that Randy and Evie give each other when Evie tells Randy that she is beautiful, that is a look that one day in 20, 30 years, whatever, they will still remember that look as like the reverse, where it was the beginning of where our years were buried. And now in 20 years, if we run into each other somewhere, we're going to lock eyes and there will be a look where many years are buried and we'll know it goes back to that look. I'm projecting so much onto these characters right now, but it feels so emotionally true. I think this movie is willing to be emotionally true in ways that lots of movies are unwilling to be, because they're afraid of being called sentimental or cliche or something. Mm-hmm. You're just looking at me right now.
Because you're just so, there's just so much joy. I can't add anything to it. I have nothing intellectual to say in response. This movie, I feel like it doesn't want us intellectualizing their joy. And there are plenty of philosophers that would be like, I just wrote a 500-page fucking dissertation on joy. Mm-hmm. And rightfully so. We need the kind of philosophical work. But I do think joy is one of those things that really evades analysis, because part of what makes something joyful is the inability to fully name the feeling of it.
Yeah. So it's more that like you said, it evades analysis, not that it's necessarily easy or simple.
Yeah.
Because we once had a professor who said that joy had no narrative arc. I didn't agree with that.
What is living for, if that's true?
Because she's like, it's boring to write about good things because joy has no narrative arc. And my refutation against that, I guess, would be that joy is almost always hard-earned. It doesn't just arrive out of nowhere. It often comes out of struggle. Even if you look at this movie, Evie at the beginning of the movie, she's in an unfulfilling romantic relationship. We don't really know the ins and outs of it, but her boyfriend is only in 2 scenes and he doesn't have much to do. But it's very clear that relationship just is not fulfilling her. And so she ends it. And then she discovers the joy of a fulfilling relationship. And it ends up being with a woman, which is not necessarily what I think she would have expected for herself. So she went through this, at times, confusing, stressful transition of life to get to this joy. So that is a narrative arc right there. In terms of Randy, most of her romantic experience involves making out with a married woman in the bathroom at her job, which we can get into that. And it involves people at school bullying her and othering her for being gay. And then she develops a crush on this girl, and she thinks it's a lost cause at first because she's like, no, I'm pretty sure she's straight and there's no way she would like me. And then, surprise, she actually likes you back and they fall in love. That's another narrative arc. So the end result is joy, but it didn't start that way. And I think that is part of the value of the romance genre in general, though obviously romance is not the only conduit to joy that exists, and it's important that we acknowledge that. But I think people often write off romance stories because they're seen as frivolous or uncomplicated or whatever. But even the most high concept, like fantasy-laden rom-com, there is still a real narrative arc to get to the joy at the end. And so if anything, those movies are teaching people that, one, just that joy is possible in a romantic context, if that's what you want. And two, that it is something that doesn't just come out of nothing. It's something that you have to sometimes work for or fight for, and that it will change you to arrive there.
Mm-hmm. And that isn't to say that joy comes easy. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that we shouldn't analyze joy or define joy. Mm-hmm. I'm saying it isn't required in order to be experienced. That analysis isn't required in order to be experienced.
I actually do have some thoughts about the whole Wendy thing, if we want to talk about it. I know that topic has taken up a lot of space in other episodes, so if you're like, I don't want to talk about,
we can.
But
I don't have a lot to say about it beyond, well, if you want, yeah, we can talk about it real quick.
Okay. There is a plot point in this movie that at the beginning of the movie, Randy is having a fling relationship. The language around these things is very difficult. With a woman named Wendy. Wendy is 27. I think she's 10 years older than Randy because Randy is 17. Wendy is 27. She is married to a man, but is obviously attracted to women because she comes to the gas station where Randy works and they make out in the bathroom. And that's the extent to their relationship. The opening scene in this movie is the two of them making out and then Wendy leaving and saying she has to go home to her husband. And Randy is hurt by that and confused and not satisfied. And we could have just probably cut that plot line altogether, right? We could have this movie pretty much be the same without it, for the most part. But I think, okay, here's what I'm thinking. There probably are movies that would just depict this relationship between Wendy and Randy, where Randy begins this affair with this older married woman. It's a secret. The older married woman is obviously closeted. And it could just be a movie about this unhealthy relationship that ultimately breaks Randy's heart. And the movie ends with her finally ending the relationship, but she's totally broken down to her worst point or something. That could be a whole movie. And in some ways, we have watched variations of that movie, a la The Starling Girl or Miller's Girl. But instead, what this movie chooses to do is use that relationship with Wendy as a jumping off point for Randy to realize the kind of relationship she actually wants and needs, which is with someone who is her own age and therefore appropriate. Because early into the movie, she tells Wendy, I don't want to do this anymore. This doesn't make me feel good because you come here when you want me and we make out and then you go home to your husband and I'm just all alone. And I don't like it. Before she and Evie get together, she tells Wendy, I have another girlfriend now. I'm breaking up with you. And Wendy's mad about it. I could see a version of this movie where this whole Wendy plotline just goes away, and I think I would be okay with that. I think the movie understands that this relationship wasn't good and it needed to end. I don't think this movie fully gets into the real insidiousness at play when you have a 27-year-old woman with a 17-year-old girl. But I can appreciate the way the movie comes down on the side of this was not the love story that any teenager should be forced to live through. They should be getting this alternative instead with their classmate who's the right age.
It's interesting, though, that Wendy ends up helping them. Wendy still comes back. And I love that. Even though we understand the very problematic nature of Wendy's relationship with Randy, Wendy is not entirely demonized.
Mm-hmm.
And which is complicated because I do wonder if she was a man, would I want her to be entirely demonized? The answer is potentially yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's not what happened in this movie, but we don't have a lot of information about Wendy, but we know that her husband sucks. I think the implication is that he's abusive. He physically assaults Randy.
Right.
Wendy is more complicated. She is a victim of patriarchy and misogyny and homophobia.
Mm-hmm.
And then in turn, though, all of the things that are victimizing Wendy in turn victimize Randy. And I think are really potentially the driving force in why she begins this relationship with Randy. And that isn't to say her behavior is excused, but I think what the movie is doing is pointing out that the problems at Force are bigger than the individuals when it comes to age gap relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It's systemic.
And, Wendy ultimately accepts that Randy wants to be with Evie.
She seems happy for her when she shows up in the hotel room.
When Randy and Evie flee Evie's mom's house and are like, we gotta hide somewhere, Randy calls Wendy and is like, can you give us money for a motel room? That's how that happens. Mm-hmm. And Wendy shows up and is like, here's some cash. And there's no animosity, whatever. I think she understands that this is what these girls need and I can be here for them. So yeah, it's still difficult to watch. Like that opening scene is still difficult to watch, but I think what you said about if it was a man, would I want him to be condemned more thoroughly? And the answer is probably yes. For me as well, and that's really fascinating to think about. Comparing it to Miller's Girl, I have no real compassion for Mr. Miller. No.
I don't even want to talk about that movie again because it was so complicated to talk about it. But I have no compassion for him, and I do think that he deserves to be held accountable for his creepy, fucking, and inappropriate behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Then when we talk about a film like Starling Girl,
right? That's what I was just thinking.
We talked about that in the episode. We had compassion for, I can't remember his name, Owen, because we understood that he was also a victim.
Yeah, because that movie is framing the systemic issues surrounding these fundamentalist communities,
mm-hmm.
and that is a really interesting point of comparison. I do have some element of compassion for Wendy, ultimately.
I found it.
I just felt like we had to talk about Wendy because if people watch this movie and then they're like, there's a whole age gap situation that y'all didn't talk about at all, what's going on? I didn't want that to happen.
No, I agree. And the part where I was like, what? Was when Randy, I think she's talking to Evie, and Evie kind of realizes that they were together, and Randy's like, I don't remember what she asks her, but basically, is that weird? Do you think that's weird that I was in? And Evie's like, no. And the implication being Randy is seeing if Evie's like, ew, you are attracted to women.
Right.
But it's like, no, Randy, it is fucking weird.
It is weird,
because
yeah.
you're a grown-ass woman.
Yeah.
And you're a child.
Yeah.
It is weird.
I caught that as well. It's forefronting it with this coming out narrative as opposed to there's an age gap happening. That's not really what's being acknowledged in that scene is the age gap. It's more the fact that Wendy is also female.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually Randy learns that that relationship isn't what she needs and isn't what she should be doing with her life. And I can appreciate the movie depicting her coming to that realization.
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense that if Aunt Rebecca knew what Wendy was up to, Aunt Rebecca would get physically violent or something.
I would.
She's very protective of Randy. That is something I really, really do love about this movie is that it totally normalizes this family structure full of queer women and that Randy lives with her aunt and her aunt's girlfriend. And then at the beginning of the movie, one of Randy's aunt's ex-girlfriends shows up at their front door because she has been kicked out of wherever she was living. And so she is also living in this house. And at one point, Randy's aunt even says to her girlfriend, Vicky, we made a promise that like this would always be a home for anyone who needs it. And it's this really positive depiction of a loving, queer, functional family in a way that I wasn't alive in 1995, but I feel like was probably pretty radical in depicting that. I would assume that was something that you wouldn't get to see very often, is these gay women raising this girl together. And it's this chosen family situation, sort of. And they eat dinner together and make dinner together and argue about Randy's report card. And in many ways, it's just this normal fucking household. It just happens to be full of a bunch of gay women.
They allude to the lack of representation in media in the movie when they a few of the characters refer to some movie that came out recently where two girls go to prom together. And it's like a big deal that that movie exists.
Can I actually read another intertextuality that I have? I brought a bunch of intertextualities to this recording, not knowing which ones I was going to focus on, but this one relates to the subject I have just brought up. If you listened to our Scream episode, I quoted from a review that Roger Ebert wrote. And I'm about to do that again, which I didn't intend to do this so close together. But I found out that he reviewed this movie. And he said something in it that I thought was really insightful. He liked this movie, by the way. He liked it much more than the other review I read from a few weeks ago. But he says, quote, "Because the incredibly true adventure of two girls in love involves lesbianism, there are some who will never be able to believe it reflects family values. But it does. The portrait of Randy's family life is interesting because it involves a strong sense of home. Not only did Randy's aunt take her in when she needed a home, but she also takes in the ex-lover who has hit a rough spot. Because, as the aunt says, we have agreed that is the meaning of the home. Across town, Evie's relationship with her mother is a healthy one, with good communications. These are not conventional families, but they are healthy ones." What struck me about this section of his review was his use of the term family values, and how I feel like that's a term that's very conservative coded, or is a term that conservatives in the US have definitely co-opted as their own. We're the party of family values, we're the movement of family values, etc., etc. And it's often used as a shortcut to mean heterosexual, Christian, white. I really appreciate the way that he is taking that term and applying it to this movie by saying that actually family values, they're not part of this pigeonholed meaning. But in fact, family values are this thing that applies to people of all different stars and stripes. Because here is this movie showing us these families that have an exceptional sense of values, because the point of this home that Randy's aunts have made is we take in whoever needs it. We're a family. We have dinner together. We toast and say, we made it through another day, which I love. And I just found that really insightful of him to be saying that in 1995. Particularly since he was a straight guy also.
And we really get that sense in the kitchen scenes. There's just so much action in the kitchen and constant movement, and they're really all in there together, and everyone's talking at once, and everyone's eating, and everyone's cooking, and it's really beautiful.
It is really beautiful. And even though Evie's mom responds poorly at the end of the movie when she discovers that Evie has just been in bed with another girl, in those scenes before that, though, there's a scene where Evie and her mom are cooking together when they're eating together, and they do just have very direct communication with each other. And there's one scene in particular where Evie's mom reminds me so much of my mom when she's kind of guilting Evie into spending time with her more, because she's like, you leave for college in however many months and I'm never going to get to see you again. And Evie is very firm in her response when she's like, Mom, you know that this separation needs to happen. It's a normal adolescent response to getting older. You can't stop it from happening. I need to live my life. And I did not have that level of resolve when I was 18. That's for sure. So even though there's tension in that moment, it is this depiction of just very clear communication between these two women who are, in a family sense, they're all they have, because it's just the two of them living together.
Right.
Because Evie's an only child and her dad doesn't live with them anymore.
Something I also liked about the depiction of Evie's relationship with her mother is that her mom is really encouraging about Evie having a relationship with her dad. But it's Evie's choice that she doesn't seem to really interact with him or communicate with him.
Yeah.
And her mom says, well, he has his life and we have ours. That's just the way that it is. And you need to learn to be okay with that. And we don't get any real further insight into it. We don't know why Evie doesn't really want to talk to her dad. But I think it's important that we see Evie's mom encouraging that relationship. Because even that is countering this idea that ex-wives poison their children against their ex-husbands. And oftentimes it's just not the case. I'm going to bring us to Walt Whitman, which we haven't really talked about.
We haven't even really talked about.
Yeah, so Evie gives Randy this copy of Leaves of Grass, which is a collection of poetry written by Walt Whitman. It was originally published in 1855. Probably the most popular or the most well-known poem from that collection is a poem titled I Sing the Body Electric, which is this poem about celebrating the human body in all of its forms and loving beyond gender. That's kind of a summary. It's a pretty long poem. It's a beautiful poem. Thinking about this poem being written and published in 1855 is just,
I know.
It's just wild when you really
his work
start to
is
talk
so
about
sensual.
it. And there is this scene where Randy reads that line and she's like, I sing the body electric.
She's on her bed.
Falls off the bed.
She's smoking a cigarette at one point too. This might be a different scene. There's multiple scenes of her just reading the poetry out loud to herself. I love it. But she's reading it and she takes a drag of her cigarette and then she just goes, God, this is intense. And I love it because it's so full of discovery where, when you're 18 discovering poetry for the first time, even if it's one of the most famous poets in American history, you still just feel like you have discovered a new emotion through this poetry. And it's great. Sorry.
That's why poetry is so fucking amazing. Anyway, okay. So I don't even know how related this is to the movie. It made me think of this song called The Body Electric that came out on this album from the band Hooray for the Riff Raff. The album is called Small Town Heroes. This came out in 2014. And The Body Electric is a song about violence against women and how so often, historically, men have written songs about murdering women. And it's just murder ballads have always been very popular. Like, oh, my wife, because she cheated on me, you know? And so this song is in response to that cultural phenomenon. And some of the lyrics are, I had to write them down because I knew if I tried to just say them and not sing them, I wouldn't remember them. It opens with, said you're going to shoot me down, put my body in the river. While the whole world sings, singing like a song, the whole world sings like there's nothing going wrong. And then later in the song, the lyrics are, he's going to shoot me down, put my body in the river, cover me up with the leaves of September. Like an old sad song, you've heard it all before. Well, Delia's gone, but I'm settling the score. Because the song is titled The Body Electric, when the leaves are brought in here, obviously I think it's tying us back into Leaves of Grass. And if you listen to the song, and you should listen to this song, it's really beautiful. It's a great song. Hooray for the Riff Raff in general, amazing band. Their front person, Alinda Segura, is just a super interesting person in general, too. Even though the song is about violence against women, by bringing in Walt Whitman, it becomes a celebration and a reclamation of the body and of the murder ballad. And then probably the most famous line from that song is, tell me what's a man with a rifle in his hand gonna do for a world that's all gone mad. And I don't think that requires any real further analysis. But to put the song into a fuller sense of context, that last line, well, Delia's gone, Johnny Cash in 1962 wrote a song called Delia's Gone. And the first stanza is, Delia, oh Delia, Delia all my life. If I hadn't shot poor Delia, I'd have had her for my wife. Delia's gone. One more round, Delia's gone. So honestly, sorry, fuck you, Johnny Cash, for that song.
I had never heard that one before.
Yeah, he gets a lot of hate for that song. Right, rightfully so. Could have left that one off. And yeah, again, I don't really have a lot to connect it to the movie beyond saying that the phrase, the body electric, singing the body electric, I think it's getting at what I was trying to say about joy, where it like evades analysis because you don't really need to analyze it further in order to experience it. Mm-hmm. And I think that phrase itself, like, sure, we can analyze it quickly. We can say this is what is actually being said. That line, I sing the body electric, is abstracted from language. It's abstracted, and I think in a similar way that the feeling of joy is abstracted from notions of intellectual revelries. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, because when I think about the phrase, I sing the body electric, within the context of this conversation, I just think about the way Randy is lying on her bed saying it over and over to herself. Just the way she is acting in that moment is embodying everything you need to know about that line. You don't need to deconstruct every single syllable in the line. It's more about the way she is embodying it with the excitement and sizzle and whatnot of her own body. Because she's reading this poetry that this girl gave her, and she's falling in love with the poetry and the girl at the same time. And that's all I need to understand what that means. in that moment. I don't know if that's what you were getting at.
I mean, that's definitely part of it. Joy can be complicated by other emotions, but that doesn't necessarily deepen the experience of feeling joy.
Right. Like pure joy isn't lesser than joy that is also mixed with a sense of melancholy.
And I think that maybe that's part of why I said it evades analysis, because I think pure joy is what can be more difficult to analyze than when it's complicated by other emotions, which literature often does. And in this case, in the case of this movie, sure, the joy is complicated by the fact that homophobia exists. But it's in a way that doesn't detract from that moment where she's falling off the bed.
Right.
Saying I sing the Body Electric, or when they're in the meadow, you know?
Right.
Or when Evie lies in the hotel room.
Yeah.
To Wendy's husband, and then they're so excited about it.
Or when they spit out their gum so they can kiss for the first time. They're such dorks. I love it.
Why when I was that age, I thought it was like cool to swap gum. When you're making out, and then you switch gum, and then you're chewing the other person's gum.
I never did that, so I can't say. When I think of gum swapping, I just think of that movie Yes Man starring Jim Carrey, which is not a good movie, but there's this bit where he makes out with some random person at a bar, and then she puts her gum in his mouth, and he's like, was I chewing gum before? And the way he says it is really stupid, but it kind of makes me laugh. And that's what I think of every time I think of gum and kissing together, is I think of Jim Carrey. I can't believe I've just cursed this episode by invoking.
I know. It's okay.
Why did I do that? Okay. What does this movie make you want to tell your younger self?
I think I would go back to when I was talking about you can't love someone else until you love yourself. I would probably tell her that's bullshit. Sure, there's an amount of truth to it, but it's not the end all be all. It kind of coincides with the idea that you have to help yourself before you can help others, which also very true, right? Put on your oxygen mask before you help. Yes, sure. Especially in an emergency situation. That is true. But when you help other people, you are helping yourself. You're creating community. You're creating connection. So it just feels very toxic and capitalistic that the truest or purest form of love is with yourself first. What a sad fucking idea. Because how can you even know how you want to be loved until you feel that love for someone else? And then you're like, oh, yeah, I want to be loved in that way. The way that I love that person, I want to be loved in that way.
Now that you brought up this axiom, I guess the thing about it that gives me pause is that there's this implication that loving oneself is work that has an end point or something, where, okay, there's a threshold where I didn't love myself and now I do. And all you have to do is cross that threshold. And you cross it once and now I can love someone else, when some days I fucking hate myself, or I hate a specific thing about myself. And then some days I don't. I feel good about myself. And that certainly has a relationship with how I love my partner and my friends and my family. In that if I am unable to put my best self forward in my own mind, that can affect my ability to be there for other people. It's always in flux. So to act like there's a static nature to it is disingenuous to me.
That's such a good point. 100% agree. Because it also implies that you will attain some sort of state of moral stasis verging on perfection. I mean, sometimes I hate parts of myself, and like I kind of should. Sometimes I do bad things because I'm a human, and I make these stupid mistakes, and I treat people poorly, and that makes me feel bad. And that makes me think, oh man, I don't like myself today. And other people don't like me that day. That's the human fucking condition, man. We're all in the same ride.
And also, the way you love yourself when you're 16 is just going to be inherently different than the way you love yourself when you're 30. You're going to need different things from that love as you go through life. And the same thing goes for the love you have with other human beings. No relationship that's going to have any longevity is going to be exactly the same over the course of many, many years. It's going to change as you change, as the other person changes, as your needs change, as the world changes.
Yeah.
Basically, we know how to solve everyone's emotional problems.
Cliches and axioms become cliches and axioms because there's usually some degree of truth to them. So I'm not saying like they're complete bullshit, but it's not true in and of itself. Or at least it's not always true.
Always be discovering new things. This goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about why I love so many coming of age stories, is because they are about discovering new things. And I think they can be a really potent reminder for those of us who are no longer teenagers that we still need to keep discovering new things. Which leads me to what I would want to tell my younger self, which is that I would tell her to always look for art that presents a hopeful vision of the world. Because I'm only human. Sometimes I really love a feel-bad movie. You know? I just want to feel despair and seep in the bleakness or cry my eyes out or just have to go to bed immediately after. Sometimes that shit hits good, okay? But sometimes I simply need to be reminded of other people's hopeful visions for the world when I am incapable of summoning my own hopeful vision for the world. And I don't think it's delusional to look to something like a teen coming of age film to do that. I think it's necessary if we want to have the hope and energy to continue trying to make this world better. Which was really why I picked this movie at this specific point in time to talk about it.
Yeah. It's a good idea.
Deep breath. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please subscribe to the show. Turn on post notifications. That way you won't miss an episode when we post them. Reviews and ratings are also very, very helpful. We appreciate that so much.
Check the show notes for the secondary text we referenced. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Tell Me I'm Sorry, and email us at tellmeimsorry@gmail.com with questions, thoughts, disagreements, definitions of joy, because clearly I've been trying this whole episode to get at that. Or to say that joy doesn't need a definition. You can follow me at _Saint_Margaret_.
I'm Marin.
I'm Maggie.
And you've been listening to Tell Me I'm Sorry. And our hopeful vision for the future is that there will be more episodes of Tell Me I'm Sorry. And Maggie is going to tell us what piece of hope we have to look forward to.
Well, yes.
Yes?
Well, I'm just thinking about the film itself.
Oh.
I do find this film beautiful and hopeful.
Yeah, I guess
in ways.
Not knowing what the movie is, maybe it won't make us feel hopeful.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time. When it came out, it was like an instant classic. And I often like to watch it when the weather is turning towards gray.
Okay.
And the film is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I love it.
I should have known you were going to pick this one next. That's a phenomenal film. I haven't watched it in a few years.
It's so quiet.
It's
I really
so quiet.
like films that are quiet. Well, you know this.
The way
about
the
me.
camera that she shot it on literally makes it all look like a painting because it's a movie about painting and it's so cool. And next time is going to be in a little while because we are recording this at the end of October. It's like October 22nd. And November is coming up. There's a holiday in there where I will be traveling. I don't know what you're doing, Maggie, but you'll be on a break from school. And we have been recording these episodes very consistently for a long time now. And so we are going to take a break from recording, which means this episode that you're now listening to, it'll be out sometime early November. But then the rest of November and part of December, there will not be new episodes for a while. Because we just need a break. So maybe we can brainstorm some Instagram content. But breaks are important. And we have decided that we need to take one for the month of November.
Mm-hmm.
So we will not be recording at all during that month. But then we will be back rested and refreshed and excited to talk about Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Before we let you go, we're introducing a closing segment, which Maggie, would you like to introduce it?
Yeah. So this is something that we had talked about doing when we started the podcast. And then it just sort of, we record, Marin does all the editing. Like, it's just us two.
It's a lot of work.
It's so much. It's a lot of fucking work. And so we have all these ideas and I forgot that we were going to do the segment where we have listeners send in their juvenalia, send in poems or stories or things that they had written in their youth, and then share them at the end of each episode as a celebration of the audacity of adolescent creative musings. A couple weeks ago, my friend Parker messaged me and was like, hey, have you ever thought about reading like people's juvenalia on episodes? And I was like, we have thought about this. And they were like, I just found an old journal. And there's this poem that I really want to share. They sent a voice recording. So what you will hear next is a performance of Parker's absolutely amazing unrequited love poem written as a youth.
Beautiful. Maybe I'll add some transition music. Enjoy Parker's poem.
Okay. I don't have a title, obviously, but here we go. It's getting worse, stronger, every time with her presence, trying hard not to feel, to ignore. Why am I weak? Why can't I fight? Fight the urge, the sin, don't give in. I try to see her as a friend and nothing more, but in the end, I lose. Her stare, her smell, the way she laughs, it gets me. I get lost in her. Why must this be? God, help me see. I feel for her how she doesn't for me. Curiosity has pulled me in again. How would her lips feel on mine? Is she sweet? Is she gentle? Just to be able to touch her would help me subside this attraction, this obsession. I'm in a situation where I need to learn this incomprehensible lesson. Dude, my handwriting's not even the same. I used to write in all caps. I guess if I write in all caps, it's kind of similar, but still, I have straight up chicken scratch now. I can barely read it. I'm just flipping through the pages right now. Oh my god. Wait, oh, I forgot about, is this another one? No. It's not another love one. It's just a super emo one. Anyway. No, I lied. There's a title to the series of poems in this thing. And that is Secret Messages Written on the Walls of a Lost Soul. Oh my god. Enjoy.